think it's been the new narrative of business has been being developed for quite a long time. I think after the global financial crisis, it got a lot of legs. And rather than say there's kind of one perfect model for this new narrative, what my colleagues and I have tried to argue is, look, there are five things that have to happen regardless of how this new narrative turns out. You've got to deal with purpose and profits. The idea that it's just purpose, that profits don't matter, foolish idea. Every business has to be profitable. And the road to profits is through some sense of purpose. So there's profits and purpose. There's stakeholders and shareholders. We have to see business as a societal institution as well as a market institution. We have to see people as fully complexly human as well as having economic interest. And we have to put business and ethics together. These five ands, purpose and profit, stakeholders and shareholders, society and markets, humanity and economics, and ethics and business, these are the core of this new narrative about business. The great news is that there are literally thousands of businesses all over the world being started and being converted to this new narrative. I like to call it all stakeholder capitalism. It's an old term that really started in the 60s, despite what a lot of people claim now, but it did. And I want to not try to say there's one model for everybody. And so I think the tide's turned. I don't think there's any going back. I haven't heard anybody argue that, gee, the way to deal with inequality and the way to deal with global warming and the way to deal with racial and gender inequity and all the other problems in the pandemic, the way to deal with that is to double down on paying attention to shareholders. And nobody's argued that for good reason. It won't work. And so that's why I think this new narrative is, again, it sort of changes generational, but it really is the past the point of no return, I think. And that's a challenge for directors and boards who are not quite there yet. I've been writing about this for the last, I don't know, 45 years or so. Um, I, it's a mistake to say it's stakeholders or shareholders. Look, even if all you care about is making money for shareholders, how are you going to do it? You better have some great products that customers want to buy. You better have that makes their lives better. You better have suppliers who want to make you better. You need employees who are engaged in what they're doing, not just collecting a check. Um, you need communities who want you there and don't pass regulations to prevent you from doing things. And if you do those things and you get kind of lucky, you're going to make some money. So this juxtaposition of shareholders versus stakeholders is a false choice. Business has always created and sometimes destroyed value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money, the financiers. That's just what business is. What we're seeing now is businesses, you know, understanding that, oh, I'm creating value for my stakeholders, and that's connected. How I create value for customers determines how I'm able to create value for employees, determines how I'm going to create value for the other stakeholders in turn, including financiers. A lot of people will say, yes, Ed, right, there are a lot of stakeholders, but that's not the main contribution of what I would call stakeholder theory. The main contribution is that stakeholder interests are joint, they're interconnected, and it's understanding the jointness of it that's so crucial, especially for directors and boards, because the temptation is to trade one off versus another rather than to use what I would call creative imagination to figure out how to get stakeholder interest going in the same direction. Now, the metaphor I like is you need to harmonize stakeholder interest, because in music, harmony, look, the notes are different, but they sound real good together. So the trick is how to get these stakeholder interests, which do sometimes conflict, how to get them sounding good together, how to get them going in the same direction. And that's hard to do. Thinking about stakeholders is in a way easy. Actually doing it and getting them going in the same direction is difficult. And you can't do it without being directly engaged with them. And that's why stakeholder engagement is so crucial these days. You know, Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, of course, he never used the word. You know, we get the word capitalism from Marx, and that's that's probably not a great idea. It's a different way to think about business. You know, and business is the most powerful institution on the face of the planet. It's gotten billions of people out of poverty. It's made our lives, the fact that we could do this video, it's made our lives immeasurably better. And again, we should always be trying to improve it, to improve how we think about it. And what the stakeholder idea is, it says, if you realize that what you're doing is you're creating, and sometimes you destroy, usually it's through not thinking value, but you're creating value for at least customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with the money. You can do it better. You can improve it. You can think about how these interests can go together. And of course, innovation is a critical piece of that. You know, one of the mistakes that people make here is to say, well, you know, entrepreneurs want to maximize the value to the owners and then the shareholders. Well, I just don't know any entrepreneurs who do that. Most entrepreneurs start a business because they're on fire about something. They've got some purpose. They've got something in the pit of their stomach that makes them go. And yes, of course they got to make money. That's like saying, you know, I got to breathe and make red blood cells, but that's not the purpose of my life in any sense. So I think that sort of mistake of forgetting about purpose, focusing too much on shareholders and focusing too much on the economic aspects here, especially of employees, are some of the barriers that keep people out. Those aren't the same thing. I mean, one of the things is we live in this information and data rich world in which it's very hard for anybody to keep a secret. A better assumption is that there aren't any. A good assumption around sustainability, I think, that many companies make is if you ever thought you were going to get away with something, you can't anymore. Um, on the other hand, um, that's not a substitute for this idea of stewardship, and saying, wait a minute, management and boards do have a special role. They have a special role to use the resources they have access to in a way that, yes, makes money, and yes, is good for society. Now, the problem is, of course, what's good for society has multiple interpretations. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is a demand that business people and businesses have a role in that. They have a role in the conversation about what they would generally have avoided under the old model, which is, more controversial societal issues. One of the things I'm very much a fan of in the U.S. is a group called Just Capital. And Just Capital, of course, measures and reports how well companies like the Business Roundtable companies are doing with issues like the pandemic, with racial justice, with inequity, in terms of what they're doing. Are they, so in a way, they're kind of holding their feet to the fire to say, look, you said you believed in stakeholder capitalism. What are you doing on these issues? And the results have really been, to my mind, phenomenal. It's not everybody's perfect. I don't know what world that is, but it's not the one I live in. But people are doing an amazing amount of things to make progress. So, I'm still pretty optimistic. Well, I'm very optimistic about the way the business world is going. The difference, I do have sometimes an issue with reporting, because with the focus on reporting, it's oftentimes easy. This is easy in just regular accounting. As a finance colleague of mine said, let's not mistake the report of an activity with the activity. And I'm more interested in the activities, in what businesses are actually doing, than the reporting process. I understand that's important, but if I'm a board member and I'm just checking to see that we do all the reporting, I think it's fair to say that that's a road that can lead to bad consequences. And I just would mention companies like Enron, etc. We need to figure out how we're actually engaging with stakeholders, not just how we report that we're engaged with them. I think if you're an iconic brand, you're going to be held accountable for everything that goes into your product, down the supply chain to how it's disposed of. And I think that's just I would say that's a fact. I'm not saying there might not be better ways to organize, but I am saying that's a fact. So you can fight that, but I don't think it really does any good. I think you have to embrace it and figure out how to do it better. Um, because if business is always fighting those things, it gets the reputation that it doesn't really care about society. Now, sometimes in non-iconic brand things, people don't know who you are, etc., and so you're not held as publicly accountable. But once again, the test ought to be, if you know about bad stuff, or you could have known, and there's something you can do, you know, you don't have to sacrifice everything, but you have to put forth some effort to fix it. I mean, I think that's what we would teach our children. And I don't think there's any difference in business. So certainly, if you had to say what's the trend is towards full supply chain accountability. Now, accountability is one of those things that, there's a lot of it to go around. And so it's not just I'm fully accountable. Sometimes the legal system will hold companies fully accountable because they have deep pockets. But of course, you know, uh, child labor, for instance, is a complex issue that has to do with poverty in societies and the institutions that promote or try to alleviate poverty, and business is one of those. So I think part of it is trying to understand business as a societal institution as well as just a market institution. We're really good at understanding business in terms of what are the market forces that act on us. I don't think we're so good at understanding the societal forces that act. I see several forces on the horizon. Uh, One is we're on the cusp of some really incredible technological changes with the advent of AIs and all of the technologies that come from that. I'm one of those people who think, we haven't seen anything yet, and that's gonna give us a whole host of challenges that are ethical challenges because we haven't thought about things like, I mean, if we just pick something like self-driving cars, the ethical challenges for how you program those are substantial. Um, I don't think there's any way to. Let me put it this way. I think in a way the shareholder only idea will sort of collapse on itself. If you look at what's happening Wall Street and the city, you see people trying to get a handle on ESG and impact investing and all of those things. You see the emergence of, public-private stakeholder partnerships, etc. And it will be very easy for boards to be left behind in this. I think there's got to be a different role. We got to rethink the role of the director. The director doesn't have an obligation just to shareholders. The director has an obligation, in the U.S. at least, a duty of care to the corporation, to manage the affairs of the corporation. Well, what are the affairs of the corporation? It's just customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and people with money. And so directors have to take this broader view, and the way even the investment community is going, the pressures for them to take this broader view are fairly substantial. And if they don't, what will happen is government in free societies, people will go to government, and then we'll get a bunch of rules, which are one size fits all, one size for everybody, and that's not going to be it's not going to be very helpful. I think I'd much rather see every company design for its directors. Here's how we're going to be involved uh, in stakeholder engagement. That's a much more powerful way because companies are different. And we need to understand, and that's what makes business great, is that companies can be different. There are lots of ways to run, in my view, there are lots of ways to run ethical businesses that create lots of value for stakeholders. Lots of ways to run that. If you're always looking for only that, those strategies, those ideas that maximize the value to one stakeholder, you're going to miss all of that. And I think in part the the technologies will lead us to that. Now that's all said in a global political world where I think you have to think about that, but I'm not nearly as optimistic about those political institutions. I just hope directors and executives that listen to this and read the report, can sign up for, being the generation that makes business better. That's what we have to do. It's this incredibly powerful societal institution, and we need to make it better. And I'm optimistic that there are enough companies that are doing it, but there are also companies that will fall by the wayside if they don't.